Jacoby vulgaris is a common wildflower in the family Astraceae. Native to northern Eurasia, it's also known as tansywort, staggerwort, stammerwort, cankerwort, stinking willy, and lacebark, because of the unpleasant smell it leaves, which makes it disconcerting with the scent of its bright yellow flowers that smell strongly of honey. Though native to the island, ragwort is classified an injurious weed. These flowers often grow.
Hi everyone, welcome to Eastside Projects and Loop. My name's Gavin Wade, I'm Artist Curator here at Eastside Projects, and we're going to do a walk around Loop. I am here with the illustrious Harold Offay.
Hello. Hi.
And we are recovering from last night's activities. It was a very noisy, lively, wonderful experience. Thanks to everyone for coming along and engaging safely in an exhibition, in a very performative exhibition. So I'm just going to say just a little bit to set the scene. We have a number of the artists of Loop here, round and about. We'll be chasing and trying to find some of them as we move around the gallery. So we actually started this show before lockdown, maybe even the end of 2019, and we started chatting and talking and inviting Harold to come and start thinking about a future exhibition with us and to co-curate an exhibition with the team at Eastside Projects. That evolved out of the conversations and experiences of working on Sonia Boyce's exhibition in the Castle of My Skin, in which Harold played a key role as well, and we felt like there was more to explore, there was more to learn, and there was more to share about how you involve performance within art exhibitions, how performance is such a key activity. I mean, it's been a fascinating thing that's there in the art world throughout the 20th century, but I think it's become more and more a dominant key way of grabbing attention, of exhibiting properties, of asking questions. So we look to artists as well, other fellow artists, to think how do we go about doing that. So we haven't really got starting points, but in a way, I sort of think about how it is for you to come in and think about that experience.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the conversation we had was really, really important, and particularly the fact that it evolved over pandemic and lockdown, and really starting to see how artists were responding to that new context of switching to online. And I mean, that had been happening before, but the fact that that became the primary interface for lots of performances and presentations that were happening.
Yeah, and that we were talking about that before it became an absolute necessity. I mean, that's the shift in a way, isn't it? From a desire and an impulse to actually, it's the only way to communicate with people at a certain point. I mean, I'm sure there's other ways, you can post things, hide things in the supermarket for people. But in a way, that's also a sort of performance. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, I mean, it's interesting because we were talking about multiple platforms and streaming and digital, but actually it feels like the gallery has become like, like the kind of main focus, and installing over the last few days and weeks. It's really interesting how the show has really emerged from, the artist being here, and there's a conversation between the works being installed, and us being quite playful about the design of the space, with the colours, the walls, these dance floors that we've got kind of like intersecting space.
Yeah, that has been exciting. It's probably worth saying that the majority of the artists hadn't visited the space in the run-up to the show. It just hadn't quite felt possible. And then actually artists were so into producing the work, they sort of had to produce it with a virtual space in mind in some way. So that also felt appropriate, like it was there from the starting point. But the coming together, that made lots of concerns and worries about how are these things going to come together. And I suppose that we had to be thinking a lot about that. We had to really work out solutions that we felt. I was hoping we was really supporting the artists, and we're having to adapt the gallery to what the artworks need, having them together. But that did only come together properly this week.
Yeah. And I think sort of this thing of the kind of staging of the work and staging encounters and thinking about how the audience is going to kind of navigate and encounter works in the space. And the choreography of that, I think, is something that I was sort of really, really aware of being back in the gallery and thinking about the placement of the works. And there are some works where that's absolutely key. I feel like there's an axis of approaches that the artists have sort of taken, whether that's like Samra's work or Phoebe Collins-James or Caken, that where those works are activated by the presence of the audience, being in the space, being in physical proximity. And then I think with Will and Adham's work, they use the body almost as a kind of language within the work, through choreography particularly, movement, in addition to kind of text and spoken word and a kind of more, I don't know, like essay kind of sort of form, I feel. But the idea of the body in the landscape or in space, I think is also kind of really intrinsic to those two works as well.
I think that's something that was really smart and generous about your proposition of being an exhibition about the loop and about the looping of life and the circuits and the feedbacks, because it allowed lots of breathing room for where works would come together. I mean, I've only just started to piece together all the different works and realised those sort of axes across the room are this sort of birth moment that you get within Caken's work, all the way to death and mourning and thinking about after death, beyond. You have this full range of a kind of life cycle happening within, which it feels then that those sort of dance moments also really exploring that living space within those two points. And that wasn't planned or positioned or encouraged, it just happened quite naturally. That feels like a real success. I think that it just happened by itself, we just let it grow. And the artists really pushed things. Each artist really pushed the works a lot. So
I think that's also something about sound, which like sound is kind of like key within each of the works, whether that's, with Samra's work where the audience is invited to, perform with this stack of mics as a kind of platform, to kind of create these vocalizations, but to be together in creating that. Sorry, that's over here.
We'll get Samra in a minute. It's good to see this.
Or, whether that's the kind of voicing or lecture kind of performance dance that Will Fredo does, Phoebe Collins-James kind of sampling material from 90s films, cabaret, collaborating. But like when all the works are on, there's a kind of like cacophony of kind of like
we'll turn some of them. I mean, actually, we learned during the install. We realised that it's quite wonderful when they're all on together, but it's a big sound and it's quite bewildering and intoxicating in a way. But it is a lot. And we revelled in that bit last night, like putting it all on and then turning works off and spotlighting. And in a way, Phoebe's sort of led that because it already has this trigger, it has these cameras up above, and they map your movement and they respond to it. And that already introduces this idea of you as the audience are choreographing how the works sequence and your performers within that space. And about how should we be as people within the exhibition? What's our status? Should we be able to feel like we're in the performance? And that was, so it felt like a simple gesture to do that, to say, let's make a dance stage. You talk about staging, different floors, different levels. And we realised, I sort of learned about what dance floor is, and that you roll lino out to tape it together and place that on sprung floors. And so we were able to borrow some of the dance floor from Dance Exchange and our partners on Birmingham International Dance Festival. I think that was a really key impulse for us to think, what are the dance elements, what's the choreography, what are the curated elements, and then the sound is another level on that. So it feels quite very complex, but hopefully the floor is so simple. And the last part was thinking, how are we going to use this floor until we started drawing around the space, using the floor just to wrap ourselves a little bit and continue that sense of defying gravity in a way. A little bit of the loop into the exhibition design also. And it feels fun. We've had fun doing that.
Yeah, I think it's really, really playful. I mean, it's also interesting, I think, the kind of different languages, like, I mean, we'll just talk about Phoebe, unfortunately, not able to be with us today,
Yeah.
but, like, you know, using these forms, these ceramic forms, these bells and drums, again, referencing those kind of percussive kind of instruments as well.
Shall we give us a minute sound?
Yeah, let's have
I'm going to give you a bit of feedback. It takes about half a minute to a minute to turn on, and then we'll just give you. I think it's good to feel a little bit of that sound, and we'll move around and trigger some of the speakers.
And the work is called "Does the Loop Degrade?", which I think is an interesting question in terms of thinking about the structure of the loop. And Phoebe's worked with, collaborated with a sound designer, Moen, and a writer, N. Polenta, and they're these provocations that are written also on ceramic forms. So there's a kind of, as you sort of move and navigate around the work, you'll get different kind of sound loops and samples kind of coming in. And really there's something about this idea of the kind of presence of the audience in relation to the work that kind of, enlivens it, and activates it through the space.
So we're going to go over into this corner, and any second Will's going to appear.
So we'll perform last night this part lecture, part dance piece. You've got Will.
Hello.
Fleetingly, Will Fredo. Welcome. Yeah, so we're just one last bit of feedback. Let me just check if that's done.
Maybe just introduce the piece. Yeah, we haven't.
I turned the wrong switch. Yeah, so we've just been talking about the relationships of sound within the works and the kind of life cycles that are there in the works as well. And then, that wasn't planned as in between all the artists, between us as curators, it just happened that we have all these stages within it that seems really powerful, really special that they came together. We have sort of birth, we have death, we have all these life positions and rules and systems and parts. But were you just in your zone making your work, or were you thinking about how it would connect to other things in the show?
I mean, I had an idea of how the people worked and what they were doing, what kind of things they were working with, which were very certain case very similar to mine as well. And so
Yeah.
like, it's a matter of like just exploring mine, and I know that they will be connected with the
Yeah.
because we have we share same interests.
So that was more feeling comfortable with that.
Yeah, and I mean I work with such like big philosophers in a way that
Yeah.
they just cover a lot of other themes that a lot of the show also covers. So.
Yeah, it feels like in this work, it feels like you're resolving or bringing together some very big questions
Yeah.
that I presume
Yeah.
have been
Yeah, I mean,
ongoing for a period of time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm dealing with a lot of universal questions,
Yeah.
and so yeah, it's all about connection and bringing different things together that may not necessarily be seen as being connected or correlated.
Tell us about the three ideologies.
So the performance, Lection's performance is about the interconnections of the universe via three distinct philosophies of the Maya cosmology, Sufism and monadology. And they all speak about try to explain how the universe is connected, how everything and everyone is connected. And they all fall on a four-point structure, so to speak. And so that's why I use the Mayan cross, which is round, and then have the 4 points, 4 cardinal points, and then the other two philosophies also for 4 points. And so I use this as a structure to sort of explain all the philosophies and sort of like bring them together as well. So each point is correlates
I
to
felt
each
that
of the.
really powerfully with that idea of the zero that you talked about, and the idea that it represents God in lots of different positions, but that also the human position as being the place where all of the different possibilities come together. It's like there was a phrase in the guide, it's the only place where the human is I can't remember exactly what the phrase was, but it was like where everything.
The humans are the only place where the cosmos in its entirety is reflected.
The cosmos in its entirety. It's
The only, therefore a reason for creation itself.
Yeah.
So,
it's like sort of ultimate ego, but also a sense of like a job, like humanity's job somehow is to do that, like a function is to be able to be a conduit for...
Yeah, in a way. But then that's also why I think the three philosophies really complement each other, because then you have like the Mayan cosmology that says that actually there are no hierarchies between the human and the animal or nature.
Yeah.
And so I think they really enter in conversation, all the three philosophies, because they kind of like really complement each other and sort of like in a way explain each other and like fill in each other's gaps, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And just to mention, if you come and see the show, we'll have the full video of Will's performance on the screen behind us, so you can, because it's a very detailed, in-depth lecture, dance performance, so you can get that in completeness.
Durational.
Yeah. Yeah, it's intense. 35 minutes of intensity. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, there's something very poetic about the title as well. So, what is it? You don't live in the world lives in you. So thinking about, and I don't know if like embodiment or because you use this kind of movement vocabulary as well to convey and communicate in addition to speaking, reciting and adopting these kind of positions. Just thinking about that sort of process of, the body, is a kind of sort of central symbolic thing. And thinking about the body as a sign for ideas, philosophies. Just sort of intrigued how you sort of came to that. I know it's something you have done in other works.
Yeah, but in this one it's very important for me to speak about the body in relation to the mind and how they are connected.
Yeah.
And so you are also your body.
Yeah.
And so it's also very important to focus on that. Like the body is the being. So
And there's a critique of that European split.
Yes.
Of
Yes. Yeah.
But then what about individual moments like when you're doing this with your face?
Okay,
Do
yeah.
certain positions. I'm fascinated.
Yeah,
with
so
it.
the whole choreography was kind of based on movements that simulate the parasympathetic nervous system. And that's what came out from the Sufi prayer, that Sikh, which is actually one of the movements that can really stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system, the one that calms you down.
Right.
And so the whole choreography was about using those movements from not only from Sufism, but like from life in general.
Yeah.
And so we incorporated that into a dance sequence, so to speak. And so like massaging here is part of that. Here, tapping on the body, it's all part of that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of.
I mean, there's a lot of themes of well-being throughout it.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
talking about just releasing chemicals in your body and nervous system, and you're saying just singing.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is also does that.
Yeah.
So we already have actions that
Yeah.
we can do.
Yeah.
We just don't always know what they do to us.
Yeah, exactly. And so the body plays a really important role in that, because it's not just about like you thinking about things, that's very important, but there's also material, physical things that you can do to transform your life, basically. So,
Yeah. Imagine being taught that at school. You're doing all these things, and what you need to do now is you're stressed about this maths exercise you're doing. What you need to do is sing to release something in your body, or you need to move your body, and it will help you with maths. Something like that would be really interesting.
basically.
Yeah, which isn't taught. It's just like, do this, sit on the chair, do this.
Yeah, I think slowly the curriculum is changing.
Yeah.
But very slowly.
Yes.
But yeah,
But it is.
there's a lot we don't learn in school, and I think a lot of my practice is also engaging with all of that I didn't learn in school.
Right.
About everything.
Yeah, yeah.
Just anything that I speak in these lectures,
Yeah.
stuff that I don't know anyone who learns in school.
No. And
Although I
it
didn't
feels
see
like it
anyone.
should be important that you learn it at a younger age, because it can help you deal with reality as well. So, yeah. Fascinating. And just to mention, so you are off to do another version of this
Yeah.
performance as well in
Yes.
Russia.
Yeah.
How are you approaching that? Are there some variations on it, or will it be a very, very different sort of space that it happens in?
It's a very different space.
Yeah.
But the performance itself, it won't change so much. And of course, there's like the Russian link as well already within the performance, within the lecture. So this space is very different. It's a former circus, actually.
Oh, wow.
So there's actually going to be like a circular podium.
Okay, oh wow.
That's really good.
Yeah. So I need to be at the space and see if actually anything will change.
And so which of the barbers that you recommend in Birmingham then? I know you were looking to have your hair altered for
Yeah.
the performance. Which were the one? Were they good?
Yeah.
Do you want to give them a shout out? Do you remember who it was?
Golden Blades.
Golden Blades.
Golden Blades. Yeah.
I just think it's quite. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Golden Blades. Oh, I'm here.
I just it felt really
Shout
like you
out
were
to
so
Golden Blades.
everything was so integral and connected, and like when you moved around, the reflection onto the floor in your head was, and it's a very simple thing to do, but actually it's so powerful. It's really, but I just think there's a lot of there's a few other people who have helped make parts of the work as well. I think that's the other thing. It's just interesting that you're collaborating with a fashion designer and a music
collector,
maker.
flashy clothing.
Yeah, but it's a big, in a way, it's a big setup.
Yeah, it was like a small big production.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
A lot, and very lengthy process.
Yes. Well, thank you for so much effort and energy and detail put into it. It was an amazing performance.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Okay. We're gonna move on and hunt some other artists down who are here as well, hanging around the gallery. Thanks, Will.
Thanks,
That's
Will.
great. Cheers. Let's go and speak to Kate.
Yeah, let's go.
Hello.
Yes, then the light comes.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, over here we have Izzy and Tanny and Hannah, who are Kaken. And they've been also having a lot of fun. And, well, not only you, so, I mean, we're going to find out about this, but a lot of other people last night were trying on this meta room, this better body. So their artwork is called Better Body. Looks like Beta Body.
Yeah,
Right.
because it's kind of like beta stages. It's like we're trying to create this like technology. It's trying to like think it's almost like normal beta stage. It's also like better.
And what is a beta stage?
Like when you're doing testing for like different, I guess you can do technologies. I think maybe it's like different.
It's like the pre-rollout stage.
Before it's being.
But it's at a level in which you can test it.
Yeah, so like normally when we like sometimes we find new technologies, we'll like sign up to the beta stages so that we can like track people else to try technology.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's a play on kind of better body because it's kind of, and it's the sort of wearable haptic room, so it's an extension of the body. So we're trying to come up with,
I guess like we're thinking a lot about how like, so for example if you have like a screen or something, it's like the screen is like very dislocated to the body, and we're really interested in how do you create like organic matter through technology, like how do you make it so that it's holistic, how do you make technology that like allows people to use that whole body, because like the body, like it's like the brain is actually sun to the body, so it's like how do you interact with technology in a holistic way and stuff like that.
I liked the fact that quite early on, this was your response to the project. This was like the idea of, you in one of the very first conversations, I think you were talking about being super excited about creating a haptic wound. And it's just interesting why. Was that in response to the idea of Loop, or was it just in response to the idea of an exhibition with performative possibilities? Or?
So we, in 2017, we did like a performance with silicone wounds, but not with haptics, and it was really interesting performance because it was a 3-day durational. We had loads of performers perform in slots, and it was a super like cathartic experience, and loads of people had really strong reactions to it. So like everyone seemed very like connected to the room. They felt like it was part of their body. And we had like one of the curators he ran off for like 2 hours wearing the wound by himself. We had another performer that like cried the whole day. It was really like emotional experience.
it made her like think of
Her beginning.
her beginning in the wound.
Yeah, so we were just like, oh, like not only is like the wound something that's like innate within all of us, it's like all of us feel connected to it. It's not something that's like just like one kind of person is connected to this wound, but actually the architecture is like it's like not holy, it's like the architecture of the womb is very important to human beings. It's important, like the structure is actually very important. So we have to like look at the architecture of our bodies and what we use. Like the womb is a technology. We create human beings.
Yeah.
So we're like the womb is like way more advanced than the technology we're creating right now.
Yeah, it's worth acknowledging.
Yeah. It's like, fuck you all. Like way better. So yeah, so we were just like, okay, this is important, so we need to look at this design and like we see how we can work with it to create experiences that are really like that we think are like more holistic, or we think that like will like in the future can we make more technology that is feels more liberating for people.
So talk us through what's happening here then. Yeah, we want. Yeah, it might be good for Tanya. Tanya, you just tell us what you're experiencing and what is happening. Try and put it into words.
Yes. Oh, should we say it first, or should I say what noises we've actually programmed to haptics? We collaborated with Studio Mum Below with the haptics, and what we realised is when you programmed in different like animal noises, it creates such a diverse, different experiences in somewhere really kind of close to you, really in your kind of womb, and it's almost like a connection tool towards different species, and actually because it feels so much more integrated, so when you hear it you are really feeling it. So we'll play in a second. A dolphin feels so different to a rat, or a bass or something like that, and we put in lots of different species, and it's really interesting, like combining the sort of silicone womb, which was made by Lucy Page, which the reason that we chose silicone was because it has a real fleshy-like feeling. You know, like in the earlier performances, it really simulated some sort of pregnant sort of experience. Also, this artifact, the spoke latex artifact, we collaborated with AGF Hydra on it as well to be able to hold the womb.
Yeah, and we worked with Studio Below with the haptics too.
And we also worked with Khadija for the sounds.
Okay, I'm going to start playing.
Maybe explain your experience.
So I don't know, I guess you can hear through the mic, there's these different animal noises that are playing from the haptics, and they're playing kind of in between the layer of the silicone belly itself and also of my actual stomach. So I can feel everything that I'm hearing as well. But what's really interesting is that as the sounds change, so right now there's some very kind of like low frequency, bassy kind of sounds, and I can really feel it like rumbling from kind of like the bottom of my stomach right up to the top, and then I can feel it also through my, like from my hands on top of the belly as well. So it's this really kind of unusual experience to feel like something is actually inside of you.
So there's like a dolphin in it, and like the sound of the dolphin, and dolphins actually create like holographic, like kind of 3D kind of objects or 3D holograms as they project sound underwater. And when you hear it in here, it feels like it's doing that, which is super interesting. So it's like kind of like the idea of like, you know that a dolphin makes a sound and you listen to it through, say, the speakers, but you don't know that, because when you listen to it here, you're like, I'm actually observing the sound, I'm actually observing maybe how that, like, how it actually, like, is being communicated through the environment and through that dolphin. And you're like, oh, I'm really not connecting to that, I'm really not actually thinking about the dolphin, I just think I know it exists. And I think we were talking a lot about like, how do you connect to other realities? How do you even have the attention span? Or like, what sort of technologies can allow us to kind of, it's not saying I don't know what it's like to be a dolphin. I am a dolphin now.
No, but there's this thing about your body being the receptacle for that. Like, you having that connection through the sensations in your body. Because there's one thing to have a kind of, you know, like a kind of conceptual or cognitive idea of that, but what you're getting with this is an embodied sense of that.
It's experience.
Yeah.
People learn through experience. Like, you really don't learn through just like, you know, like when you conceptualize something, it becomes already like a kind of fictional thing within your like through interpretations of feelings and emotions. And like the experience of something is a very different thing of like how we like how we kind of like take that information and then think about it afterwards. It's a very different way in which our brain processes things.
But also it's like, you know, sometimes it's like, yeah, you hear a sound of a dolphin, you know what that is, and you're just thinking in your more logical, like more prefrontal, like cortex brain, and actually we have like the more like what's the limbic? The reptilian and limbic, which is, you know, the same as like reptiles and mammals, and we share like those systems. So there is also like other ways that we feel and connect that are similar. So I actually found like my experience when I was wearing it is, for some animals I was going, actually there are like actually some similarities that I can really connect to when it's much more experiential, like with the sounds, with the feeling, which are more, you know, when you're making
It's more primitive as well. It's like we were playing the other day, we put the speaker like live into the belly, and we were testing sounds with one another, making them to each other, and the more primitive the sound was, like or like being like really playful, and making like shh, like and like stuff like that. It was like the more primitive, the more kind of like loose we got and like carefree we got, the better the sounds were. And we were like, it's because the technology we're creating is more primitive. It's using those parts of our senses, but we just don't have technology that's doing that, so we're just forgetting that exists. And I think that's
the wisdom.
the wisdom that exists there, because also like these like the reptilian guys, it's like pre-programmed. It's like something that's like instinctive that just happens. It regulates your body, but you don't realize it's happening because it's that kind of unconscious part. And again, with your emotions, most of your decisions are based on your emotions, but you feel like you're making an intelligent decision, and you made the wrong decision because of your like intellect or something. And it doesn't. It's like the opposite way in which we should actually understand the way in which actually humans work. And I think one of the things that really connects us as a three is that we've always been so interested in how do we reprogram, or how do we think about the way the body and the mind works, and the way that we feel is actually makes sense to us, really genuinely makes sense.
There's quite a strong link there to what's happening in Will's performance as well, where Will's studying different positions, different ideologies, and how you use the body or the voice or the movement to affect change, how you have to re-educate yourself in a way. And it's definitely, this also feels like that, doesn't it? It's like an experience that is kept, it's sort of separated, isn't available to everyone.
Completely. I don't even like the sort of like society to me journey. Like, I don't know, like, for example, it's like I grew up in nature, and actually every day I spent outside, and my mum was really opposite of that. So the more integrated I am with society, the more I lose that. And it's like a very weird experience, because actually I didn't grow up like that. So that's like the opposite of so like when you know that and you're so connected to nature, it's very different experience. You really see that, like you really see how your environment just changes who you are and the way that your body regulates and stuff like that. And just like even stuff like contentness, like actually most people don't feel contentness within their day-to-day lives, because if you walk out somewhere in nature, you instantly feel content. If you want emptiness and peace, and like even like it's like, even though it's like this synthetic and stuff, it still feels like there's like a natural, like there's like this organic like matter that we need to like connect to feel regulated.
I like that range from the very high tech to the sort of like a water balloon, like a child's toy in a way. That sort of range of sophistication, it makes it really well. I saw people walking in last night and immediately were like, oh, I need to touch that. I want to, what's happening? It's like an intro without even saying a thing.
It's just drawn to it because you wouldn't go for it. But that's I think what we found we really wanted to kind of emphasise in this project is like using the power of your senses, or like those kind of the power of experiences, and like the kind of desire to want all these things, and like celebrating them, because it's not always just through verbal that how we get the best communication. There's many different ways to like possibilities to feel and engage.
And also a lot of people don't actually, a lot of people they don't communicate that way. Actually, a lot of people are very sensorial within the way that they connect, but we're made to feel like being verbal is the highest thing. So it creates like a hierarchy of like how we should behave in society.
And it's like 90% body language.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And it just like it confuses us, because we know inherently that it's not true. And even though we might not like consciously, like our body knows it's not true, so we feel uncomfortable, we feel sadness, we feel like things aren't right and stuff like that. It's because we're not actually kind of like, we're like making up the story of what we think is reality, but actually it's very different to what is reality. No one really sees reality.
Great, and on that topic, we're going to head over to another reality.
Okay.
Another reality as well.
That's called another reality, but we're going to go over
continue the multiverse.
to Adham's reality. Thank you all, it's amazing work. Yeah, it's really great. And I haven't had a go yet.
Yeah,
I'm next. Okay, let's go over the room and I'm going to grab Adham. Should we give you a little bit of the sound? Might you heard some at the start?
The Nevis' bright river runs into the Docklands, a hub and a haven for the Artrix Empire. A place where ships of oak sailed out and came back, filled with plants exotic to this land, like tea, sugarcane, Scotland tobacco, manned by sailors of colour like the Asian Lascars. The word
Okay, you're getting very, very short snippets of works here. These are very detailed. It's an 18-minute long film that Adham has made for the exhibition, and it is quite epic. It's a big journey. We were just talking with Kaken about another reality that comes from within their work, and that actually they're interested in the fact we might be getting it wrong about how we react to what reality is. And I was sort of thinking about the movement that is happening in the show, and that I started thinking about how this very simple, powerful idea in here that I didn't know whether you did this on purpose for the show, but movement, movement down the river,
Yeah.
and the movement of migration, of moving people, the idea of movement as performance, but being so political, and that no thing can be unpolitical in a way. I just thought that it's such a strong position within the whole exhibition that you say this is the natural thing to do, to move around, to adapt, to become
Natural
part
is a
of the
difficult word for me.
Yes.
Yeah, and I see where you're coming from and understand what you're saying.
Yes.
But natural.
It's like
That's a word that I
organic
consistently contest.
Yeah. Okay, but I think it's like it's not an unnatural thing. Maybe we would say that.
I like the parallel you're trying to draw where a pre-existing definition of something and my lived experience don't seem to correspond. So where I talk about classification and taxonomy and language and how they don't fit with how I live in this place, and that there might be some relationships with the other works through that is, I think, interesting.
Yeah.
And this, this work in a lot of ways, for me, ultimately, I'm the centre of that. My experience is the thing pulled it together. But in a way, that's much more drawn back from previous works. I don't talk about myself as much with this work. It's more about the place and the River Lee that I've lived near for so long, and trying to make a physical journey down that river, but also to figure out all the so many different lives and communities that are intertwined, and how they got there, and how I'm situated within that. And there, it's maybe a little bit, which is a migrant bird from multiple places, particularly the Lascars. I live very, very close to the River Lee, but it's maybe a mile or so away on the corner of Green Street, which is traditionally a very Asian and Afghan area. And being a person of colour, from North Africa, it's interesting some of the ways that are subsumed into local cultures. And I'm Muslim, but generally, I was raised Sunni Muslim, but the area is more Shia Muslim. So it's interesting how you end up relating to each other, but also getting overlaid onto each other and getting flattened onto each other by people outside of those communities, because there are many communities that build this area. So it's those kinds of tensions and the crunchiness of that somehow that is interesting for me.
Yeah, that's what it feel about. There are certain boundaries, artificial boundaries that are formed, pitched as if they are natural boundaries. I think that's what's quite interesting. That
also the boundaries that are set up for a community or an individual's survival. So like there's there's a lot of stickiness and tension and very little resolution, and that's really important. You know.
I mean, there are these kind of really rich histories and narratives, and I think there's a kind of weaving of, you know, these references to the natural world, so whether that's Paris, or the landscape, or even the idea of the river. And I was thinking about this idea of the, you know, it's like sediments and layers, and thinking about tidal flow. I'm not sure if the river is tidal or not going on, but like tidal flows, like kind of going out and bringing things in, and it feels like to me there's a kind of proposition here of a much more sophisticated idea of what might be nativist. Like inherently what's nativist is those different ebbs and flows and sediments over time through movements. And I think by presenting all these kind of intersecting narratives, it feels to me anyway, there's a kind of, like a real sort of challenge to that idea. Particularly things like plants, like these amazing plant references that you're kind of sort of giving. You know, people make all these assumptions about native plants, you know, kind of like, and so often through migration or journeying or travelling or even just seeds or, you know, those things are far more complex. There's a kind of complexification.
I enjoy the reading. This is a proposition for complexity. That's really welcome. I love that, and I think that one of the things I really enjoy, particularly with the plants, is where a plant is classified as native but is still undesirable down to its usage, down to its down to what it does, what it is to humans, you know, and that they in these videos somehow are. I hope sometimes they're the protagonist, you know. So like, I you know, when I'm working with the dancers, for example, like sometimes I'll say, you know, you are in this scene, you know, we're going to be dancing with this plant, and although you're here, it's not about you. So you know, you know, the plant is the you know, is the lead figure. You know, so that's been an interesting thing.
Can you talk a bit more about that process of working?
Yeah.
So it's Joseph and Omar.
Yeah, Joseph Funnell and Omar Jordan Phillips in this video. And so we work on the choreography in a really collaborative way. I often will come to them with a proposition and a framework, and we will have a conversation, and they will, and you know, we'll listen to music, we'll share stuff, we'll do all this outside. I mean, you know, we'll have like preparatory meetings, and I'll introduce them to, and I'll share all of the material in advance, but then, you know, we meet outside, we listen, we try to figure out choreographic phrases, and they respond to the music, and we solidify that into something that can function as like a launching point, you know, from a question essentially. So with this series of works, it was how do we produce points of contact and intimacy when we can't touch each other? You know, so there are synchronicities that we produce, and you know, while I'm doing the camera work, I'm also kind of directing them. They're responding to the camera as a viewer, understanding if their body is visible, it's performance for camera. And so, you know, I'll be saying like, Joseph, find Omar, and they'll perform the phrase in synchronicity for a while. Omar move off, and Omar will kind of improvise for a while, and then they'll find each other again. And that's kind of how it works. There's an improvisatory quality to it. A lot of the ideas are very much theirs, and they're credited as choreographers, and it's a very, very collaborative process.
And was there sort of a process of mapping specific locations? Because, you know, we get, you know, they're in the river sometimes, we get these meadows, there's, you know, images of docklands. I wonder how prescribed that was, or was that just a...
It relates to what Gavin was saying, as in a sense of moving down the river, and it actually goes to the end of the river and then back. So the Docklands bit is the Lascar sections. I kind of think of the structure of this as chapters, essentially, and chapter 3 is the Lascars, and they had a relationship to Docklands. So a lot of that is filmed, like it's filmed around Canning Town and at the Leamouth Trinity Buoy Wharf. So, you know, and then they move back for the subsequent section. The Parakeets happens, although that's mostly found footage, It's that happens in the Hackney Marshes. And similarly, the end section with Matangi, that's filmed in Hackney Marshes.
There was an earlier title that you were playing with as well, which I think was a more straight. It was. I mean, it was just more a description, and it was something like saying, or was that the previous version of Dancing with
No,
Clowns?
that was the test.
That was the test.
For the test. I don't remember the title for the test actually.
Yeah, that changed as well. It was like a, but that was an impulse at the start, wasn't it? Too.
Also, that test was not. It was not filmed for this. It was filmed for the first video because this is kind of become part of the series. And this is the third video. That the test that we did for the initial loop.
Yes, for Loop TV.
Was for the first video. So that was shot around the Oyster Flats.
Yeah, but you were able to explore that sense to move it on from there. I mean, that's what.
Yeah, very much so.
Interesting with a lot of the works to see how things have evolved over time from those very early conversations, just those impulses, and it still feels so quite very, very direct. It became even more and more and more about those aspects of how to
Yeah,
move.
about place and relationships to place and relationships with people and certain plants. I'm trying not to go too much into the earlier works because it's complex and emotionally sticky, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I suppose that, yeah. That's a good description, maybe, of all of your work. It is there. Do you want to say something about the music in there? Because that seems so particular as well. And also exploratory, like you're exploring different types of music. I don't know if it's stuff that you already know and listen to, or do you seek it out particularly for the films? Or?
I have been using a lot of mid-20th century French composition, particularly Henri Dutilleux, whose work has a really formal and very dissonant modernist quality, but it's also a very, very European sensibility, which was what was important to me. It has the way that I employ it essentially foregrounds a European mannerism, which denaturalizes some of the assumptions of the native, I hope, you know. So that's kind of how I was thinking about sound. It's a way to produce context and a way to produce emotion and feeling, you know, that you don't feel entirely at ease in these spaces or in these narratives. Nothing is stable.
And a final question, just a little bit about I feel like a strong continuity between the 3 or 4 quite recent works, or works made over the last 2 years, I think, a year and a half, that have come together. Are you still exploring themes in here, or do you feel that
Very much so.
yeah, okay.
Yeah. I mean, particularly in the last 3 works, it feels somehow like they're very much in the same territory, thinking about similar thematic areas, to the point that certain strategies get repeated, but warped or utilised for different reasons. You know, like the ways that I might deal with a plant as a protagonist, or how I might explore the experience of a bird. You know, but also the music, as you say, and the editing and the ways that we have approached choreography and movement, and how different bodies correspond to each other, and how that produces a story.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like there's more to explore in a way, just because you've set that up. I want to see the next chapter.
I really like what you were saying about sediment. I think that's like a really good way of describing how I produce narrative in this, in a way. It's like layer upon layer upon layer, and how this layer affects this layer, and how once you've reached the end of this durational viewing experience, you might have shifted how you feel, or how you relate, or how you respond to certain parts of the story and how they put together. So,
Yeah, it's good. It's great. But thank you so much, Adam. It feels like such an incredible contribution to the show. It's really special. So thank you. Okay. We're going to move over to Samra Mianja over here. We're going to invite her across the room. Come over, Samra. So, and I thought there's a perfect segue here again, which was the kind of the sedimentation and the layering in the building, and I sort of want to explore a bit with you, Sandra, the whole process of how the work has come through, because it feels like you have been actually carving out and pulling out works out of each layer that you've been going through, and there's a next and then another layer and another layer, and it's a very interesting sequence for us to have been working alongside and catching up with and experiencing and seeing how it comes into the exhibition. So maybe, I don't know how, I mean, there's a lot to describe there, but
yeah, let's go for it.
Yeah, go.
That was one of our improvisations yesterday. Go for it.
It was.
Ruth said something quite funny. It was funny, but also I think sort of accurate. She said, you push improvisation in every kind of space that you're working in. You'll keep pushing it, and that has I suppose that has been central to the way that I've been working, but not just I suppose improvisation in a performative sense, but improvisation in relation to drawing. That one line to the next, to the next, to the next, and you just kind of keep burrowing down and down and up and round, but using that sort of thought process in relation to making, or into sounding, or singing, or living, the improvisation in drawing, because this project started as a drawing project, really, drawing in relation to performance, because I was improvising and thinking about this. One of the grounding sort of principles of my vocal improvisation practice, a sound that is of us, that is older than us, that runs through us. And that's what I really was sort of wanting to interrogate in the first chats that we had.
Actually, remember when you first came here, the first day?
Yeah.
And it's like you interrogated the building.
Yeah, the
you went round and made sounds at the building to see how it bounced back at you.
Yeah. And I was drawing, I was sort of sounding, I spent literally the entire day sounding, drawing, feeling the space, the height of the space, the breadth of the space, where I could go, where I could be low, what my voice sounded like here. And I didn't know what that was going to contribute towards. So I sort of went away and started to work on these series of 5 scores, and the plan was to take them into a school because I specifically wanted to be sounding with children. I wanted to have a conversation with young people. And that was because the project kind of emerged out of this, out of sort of several moments at once, but one being the passing of my father, and thinking about not only my grief or feeling my grief, but also trying to understand what my younger brother was going through. It was like 8, and thinking that actually, he's not alone in this moment. There are a lot of people, full stop, but young people who are living in a moment where death and mortality is
very visible.
Yeah, very visible. It's
impacting on lots of people.
Absolutely. And I've had conversations with him, but I kind of wanted to, extend that dialogue in a way, and use sound, use drawings and sounding as a mode of interpretation, and drawing as the thing that we're engaging with, to have that kind of dialogue.
And that was at Chandos Primary School. So I wasn't there. You invited the children to respond to your drawings.
Yeah, so I sort of held the space for a kind of workshop. It was guided. We warmed up and we kind of looked at the drawings. We had a period of time of sitting and what's the part that intrigues you in this drawing? What are the lines that confuse you? What do you not like? What kind of what looks like something you've seen before? All these very simple questions, and then they would just sit and draw them. It's like, right, that's your score now. That's your score. That's your sound. Now we need to think about what that sound is. And then we just did very simple things, like let's do it as quietly as we can. If this is quiet and this is loud, what is this? And what is this? So it's a kind of a really kind of playful conversation, and just holding them in. You can't get this wrong. It's your sound. It's yours. It's yours. And now we're talking. We're having a discussion, and we. This is slightly separate, but we play this really fun game, gibberish, where we're running around the room and we're just having a gibberish conversation. It needs to make sense in your head, but we don't need to communicate. And that was the kind of you know, kind of something quite silky to bring us into, now own your sound. You know what it is, right? And that's where the trust lies. So that was the kind of, the next sort of process. And then we had some chats, and Howard was like, what do you want to share, Sandra? And that reframing of exhibition making was super helpful, because it was less about what do you want to present, what do you want to exhibit, and all these words have a connection, but they are different, but what do you want to share? And this phrasing of let's be together kept coming in my drawings. It was like I kept writing that for whatever reason, let's be together. And thinking through the framework of Loop and the offerings of, like, through the process of Loop TV, which felt like a meeting actually of the artists. And it also a moment to interrogate my own process, in relation to the other artists. And it was through a conversation that you had with Phoebe, where there was a conversation about death and the process of dying, and I was thinking about my own sort of composting practice and how, there is a death there, but things are still being nourished. There is still life in that moment of death. And trying to use that and that kind of framework to think about the moment at the school as being the performance, the moment where something has happened, and if that were to come in the gallery, actually it's kind of dead at that point. It's done. But using that idea of composting, how can it decompose? How can those ideas kind of nourish us, still be here in the way that Eastside's permanent collection of artworks? The moment has passed, and yet they're still able to nourish us without that sort of context, right? So I was sort of thinking, well, what am I going to do? And so I just sort of started with, the sort of score itself. The larger score that I took to school was, this size, 5 pages in a concertina.
But standing upright.
And standing upright.
Screen.
And then these are my dimensions. So I just came into the gallery and just took everything apart. Rolled up the paper, took all the staples out, put those in a bag, took all the nails out, took everything apart. And in that process of undoing, I was thinking about what is this decomposition. I was actually, decomposing them. And what then happens? How can these live and exist in this space? And then at some point I just thought, let's make some mic stands.
Was that because of practicalities, that once you started carving and you found a place to turn the wood, was that you realised, they've got a similar potential, a possibility of a form?
I think I just felt like, what is going to hold, what can hold this meeting? Like, what can hold this moment? What can hold it? And actually, in a way, quite literally, quite physically, like a microphone stand literally holds the sound, but
it holds your voice.
It does. But now there's this kind of extra thing that I've been thinking about. Actually, microphone stands. I was speaking to a friend, Steve, who was saying, microphone stands are supposed to be audibly silent. They're made to have these 3 kind of points. The plastic on the end is absorbing sound. The cradle itself is to make it kind of audibly silent. And I was saying something that they're also kind of visually silent. The black is similar to the black that prop hands wear in theatre to be invisible. And actually, I didn't want that. I wanted them to kind of hold the poetic that I've been rolling with, which has been these 5 Mourner figures that I've written in a series of poems that are also in the show. And I wanted each of those was drawn with the poem. So just thinking, okay, hold on to the teeth, otherwise you'll fall out. Hold on. What would that be? Kneel on the gums, a raucous scene, and look out at the show. That one needs to kind of command and hold the space. And I kind of went through the same process with each of them.
Yeah, they sort of
Yeah.
feel the poetry
Yeah.
in them as objects.
Yeah.
It is there, and it's great to hear that then spoken about. But I mean, having made sound into the microphones, you sort of feel it when you're having to bend down and get into music, especially when other people are doing it
Yeah.
at the same time.
Yeah.
So I think I really like that idea that you made another invitation. It's like a generous thing. Again, there is a new space, a new experience, and you are invited.
Absolutely. I mean, we had a kind of moment yesterday,
Yeah.
and it felt both like I was aware and kind of looking at you both whilst we're sounding and improvising, but I was also kind of in my own little microphone. I think I was here, you were here, so
Yeah.
we could make eye contact,
Yeah.
and Howard, you were sort of like down here, but we could kind of connect if we wanted to, but we could connect through the sound, or we
Yeah.
could look,
Yeah.
and there are those options. And then there's the option of, I suppose, listening in and observing the animation and the poetry and the film over here. And
Maybe it's
that-
worth just walking around to see that.
Yeah.
So that's what I think is really interesting. Each of the works has a different spatial relationship,
Yeah.
a movement relationship of audience and performer. So here, as the audience, you can be the one audience member who puts the headphones on, and it becomes a soundtrack for the animations
Yeah.
that are on screen, and that is quite an unusual
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
setup.
the structure of that with, this staging, which is so much about the kind of communal and collective and coming together and jamming and improvising, and that also being quite public. And then that's what's generated by that sound is channeled into this one headphone that one person experiences in this kind of more intimate space with these animations. And so, similarly together, we're really interested in that sort of dichotomy between the public
And that we might be having, there's moments of very serious.
Oh,
there
yeah,
are
yeah.
seriousness, but there's also moments where we're really having fun.
Yeah.
And then there's an intensity and a serious, heavy points and really important things going on in the first text. And then the second new animation has I suppose, a different lightness to it. It opens up. That's all. But that's sort of been improvised as well, in a way, or developed and then just happened in the process of putting the final exhibition together.
Yeah. And I mean, what kind of sits in between the two? Because I think it's a really fair observation. What sits in between the first one that was originally a trailer for Loop TV and the second animation is the workshops in the schools, which was also an opportunity for me to learn. That was playful, that was, it was dynamic, it was funny, it was weird. And that sits in between. And so, and then there's this kind of like more it just, all the notation from the scores is embedded within this, and all the sort of like colouring and the textures and stuff are all images that I've been collecting throughout this project. But there's a lightness to it. I was really focused on this coloured blue, and with this animation actually I just allow a breadth of kind of colours and gradients to just emerge and burst. But it also, in terms of this, what you were saying, Harold, about the kind of intimacy of the single headphone, I loved imagining just one person, and I loved watching people yesterday, just the one person sort of peeking over at this group of people, and sometimes feeling as though that sound was for them. And sometimes if we knew the person, we might bring that in, or we might kind of,
Freak them out a little
yeah,
bit
just
sometimes.
do something that was kind of edging towards them.
It's quite it's a gap and a sort of link at the same time, which is very interesting. We were thinking that we might make some noises then. So there is an invitation to you to come and to improvise.
Yes, come.
And to bring your perfect audience member to listen on headphones and take turns and swap. Maybe that's how we can. We should just we'll just do some. We'll make some sounds. Thank you very much for coming and meeting all the amazing artists. And please come and experience the exhibition and the full volume of when it's all turned up together. And join in. Thank you. We'll just go and make some
Yeah, let's do it.
sounds.
I'm going to go low again.
Ready for